Vigilante Williamson here with a very simple question. Why in the world are we canceling everything in the name of subversive racism disguised as social justice while letting actual culpable parties walk away with little to no criticism? Why are we canceling Uncle Ben for supposedly racial stereotypes? Because nothing screams racism like a smiling black man as a national spokesperson for a popular brand.
It's a fucking clown world out there, folks.
By the way, Uncle Ben was a farmer from the 1940s, not a slave, and his image is of a Chicago chef named Frank Brown. Why are orcs now problematic from Dungeons & Dragons? Apparently, since various artists and authors have used elements of real-world non-European cultures when depicting orcs in books and other media, this, according to comicbook.com, solidifies the idea that orcs were a reflection of non-European races, and of course, that's incredibly problematic. I hope the author didn't hurt themselves stretching or leaping this far. For those who don't know, orcs are a fantasy race from Dungeons & Dragons. And I guess because they are always depicted as less intelligent and inherently evil, this of course means they're non-European. What? Is that not enough subversive racism for you? How about realtors going away from using the word master referring to bedrooms and bathrooms? Or how about GitHub getting rid of master branches? Control flow and repositories are a lot outside the scope of this video, but basically think of them as different save states for your code, with the master branch being the version that your code is actually running on. I almost want to laugh to keep from crying. Why in the world are all these things that are trying to avoid being racist actually more racist by being canceled? Every depiction of a black person is not stereotypical. Sometimes it's just a depiction of a black person. Why in the world does a fantasy race that happens to be evil and unintelligent automatically give people the thought that it has to be a non-European race? That makes no sense. And I can't even believe I have to say this next sentence, but orcs don't represent any race because they're not people. I can't even say it without laughing. They aren't real. They're fictional. Anyone who's ever played Dungeons & Dragons already knows this. This may be a newsflash to all the balkanistic psychopaths that run our media, but I am not a slave and I will never think of myself as one. And I don't inherently think Caucasians are masters. Unfortunately, throughout human history, many cultures have been masters and slaves, including Caucasians as the slaves, and depending on what you believe about the ethnicity of the Moors, blacks as the masters. And it's unfortunate. Slavery throughout history has been disgusting. But ironically, all the members of the media who are virtue signaling would never throw away their laptops and their phones, even though for the most part they're built in sweatshops, which is basically modern day slavery. Back to Uncle Ben. What exactly makes his depiction racist? He's just a guy. He just looks like a smiling man who's black. Is it that we can't have smiling black men because there were slaves who were depicted as smiling black men, but now we're saying that we can't depict black men as happy? I mean, there's a slippery slope when we start considering things racist just for having black people in them. If we look at creativity in general, we're seeing a large amount of Mary Sue-like characters, and this comes from the fact that there's a loop that happens where there's an increased want for diversity's sake, even if it doesn't necessarily fit a good narrative. In order to meet these self-imposed diversity needs, you have to show a wide array of characters, which cheapens each character's individual impact. In addition, you have to depict them a certain way because you don't want to be considered a bigot. So then you depict this all-powerful and uninteresting character that lacks basic humanity. And of course, if someone criticizes the character, the same rules apply, and they therefore must be a bigot. That means that other writers and creators are less likely to even want to include diversity. In the case of Uncle Ben, a black spokes character. Now, if this character isn't done perfectly, you're open to a lot of criticism and backlash. The standard for writing then becomes impossible because now they have to write an interesting character without flaws, and there's no such thing. In order to increase the sensitivity of diverse depictions, you end up not wanting to use them at all. I get that this section about characters in general is a little bit out of the scope of this video, especially for this section when I have so much more to cover, but I couldn't unsee that parallel. And I think in the long run, it'll lead to less black spokes characters, which in my opinion is the outcome that seems more racist. Then there's Aunt Jemima. Well, this one's obviously a depiction of a mammy, right? historically, definitely. I mean, even her name comes from an old minstrel show song. I don't see an issue with how she looks now. That said, I'm not gonna argue this one too bad. I mean, this is not a hill worth dying on, but I do have two issues with outright canceling her. One is the family of Lillian Richard, who is one of the women who have portrayed Aunt Jemima over the years, doesn't want her to be removed.
We want the world to know that our cousin Lillian Richard was one of the Aunt Jemimas, and she made an honest living. We would ask that you would reconsider just wiping all of that away.
And that begs the question, why can't we just modernize Aunt Jemima? I mean, she doesn't have to be depicted in the same way. Again, she's just a black character. And I can make an argument that there already is a modernized version of Aunt Jemima for a different brand, and I don't see nearly as much backlash.
Love that chicken from Popeyes.
Yes, the beloved Popeyes lady. You can make a legitimate argument that she's just a modernized version of Aunt Jemima, and that future generations may find her offensive. I mean, what is the real difference between the Popeyes lady and Aunt Jemima? They're both smiling black women who are cooks, and that invokes slavery, right? Or is the Popeyes lady just a charismatic spokesperson who has a long association with the brand and whose character represents a worker for that brand? I mean, that's basically the same thing as Progressive's flow. And I guess that's my point. At the end of the day, the Popeyes lady is just a successful, memorable, and lovable spokesperson. So again, I ask, what is the difference between her and Aunt Jemima? Honestly, I don't see one. Not only do I not see a difference, I also don't see any implication of indentured servitude with either character. I'm of the opinion in order to find a lot of this stuff offensive in the first place, it requires racism. Okay, let me play Angel's Advocate. Let's say you're watching this and you're thinking, hey, Vigilante Williamson, your name sounds stupid, your mask looks stupid. Of course all these things are racist. Of course all these things are offensive. You're entitled to that opinion, but even if you have that opinion, wouldn't it be more pertinent to go after, I don't know, the corrupt prosecutor's office to help enable everything that happened with George Floyd? That is, of course, if this is still about George Floyd. George Floyd's death has been co-opted by so many people. Who could blame you if you went Nancy Pelosi and forgot his name?
If you tell me that this legislation is worthy of George Kirby's name.
But that indeed was the origin of this whole anti-racist campaign, which, similar to Antifa, seems like the anti is silent. Officer Derek Chauvin, the man who killed him, had 18 complaints over his 19-year career. Over his career, there were 2 Hennepin County prosecutors, Amy Klobuchar, now a Minnesota U.S. Senator, and their current lush as prosecutor, Michael Freeman. And I am not joking when I call him a lush, as I'll get into later. I can't say for sure how his complaints clustered up because I wasn't able to find the date data. I can guarantee at least one complaint happened under Klobuchar, of which she had some plausible deniability. While the incident happened while she was prosecutor, the legal proceedings did not get underway until she was already a U.S. Senator. So while she gets plausible deniability for that incident, she doesn't get off the hook for her controversial use of the grand jury in every single police brutality incident except one under her tenure as prosecutor. Over 120 incidents under her tenure, and most went to the grand jury. Again, this is optional. This is just her way of being a career politician and passing the buck. And then, when pressed, this woman has the nerve to say,
it is time to end systemic racism with systemic change.
Do nothing as politicians like her are the systemic racism. What about the story of Myron Burrell, a teen who was convicted with no gun, no fingerprints, and no DNA? Not only that, another man, and let me be clear as I say his name, Ike Tyson, has already admitted guilt multiple times and can't get anyone to listen to him. When was this case, by the way? 2002, when Klobuchar was running for election as prosecutor. Granted, she did run unopposed. Still, this was just a part of her campaign to be tough on crime. And the prosecutor's office has ignored evidence for years. Granted, most of that ignoring goes under Mike Freeman, the current DA, along with most of Chauvin's complaints. But I'll get to Freeman later. I want to get back to Klobuchar. She had a lot of cases under the grand jury. Reading this APM reports, who's illuminating journalism.
Very poor choice of words.
Over 8 years, beginning in 1999, the city of Minneapolis paid out $4.8 million in legal settlements related to 122 police misconduct incidents. Police officers and county sheriffs were involved in 29 civilian deaths, but Amy Klobuchar never brought charges in any case involving law enforcement. She instead routinely put her decision up to a grand jury. This process is widely criticized for its secrecy and mostly allowing the police version of events. Klobuchar didn't take on any of the misconduct claims. The mother of a teenager who was shot and killed begged Klobuchar to file charges against the officer instead of presenting the case to a grand jury. A grand jury is a way of hiding that the prosecutor is not giving the full information of guilt to the grand jury. Tanisha Williams Brewer wrote to Klobuchar at the time, "I want this process out in the open where everyone can observe it and make sure that it's fair to my son." Klobuchar never responded directly to her. They proceeded to present a case to the grand jury. Of course, they found that the shooting was justified. 2 years earlier, a riot broke out in the predominantly black Jordan neighborhood in North Minneapolis after police accidentally shot an African-American boy during a drug raid. A federal mediator quickly tried to calm tensions, but Klobuchar, of course, did not get involved. A local civil rights activist, Ron Edwards, criticizes her significant amount of indifference regarding the problems facing the Native and Black communities in the area. Apparently at a CNN town hall, she said she's been working on racial justice issues her entire life. If by working you mean passing the buck, yeah, I guess you have. Police shot and killed 25 people and 4 died in custody while Klobuchar was the chief prosecutor of Minnesota's largest county. She sent all but one case to the grand jury and none were charged. By all evidence, this is a woman who consistently abandoned authority, her job, and just wanted to be a career politician. If you look at her voting record, she's just someone who votes whatever the Democratic Party tells her to. And of course, if you're wondering, she is one of the politicians who passed this stimulus bill that went mostly to the rich and gave us crumbs. Let's not forget about the Minneapolis Police Department, one that was so racist internally that the current police chief had to sue in 2007, citing a civil rights complaint alleging systemic racism and discrimination. Back in 1992, Madera Arredondo, along with other black officers, received death threats from the KKK. The suit was settled in 2009 for $800,000. We can argue either way whether or not a settlement is a admission of a quantifiably racist police department. It can be argued that it is, and that's why they settled, or it isn't, and they just wanted to get rid of the case, so they settled. I digress. This is the same police department that gets their case heard by the grand juries that Amy Klobuchar sent her cases to, so she didn't have to do any work. So she could just wait till the right time so she could run for senator and go off to be a generic, non-useful politician. Of course, I have to get to Michael Freeman, a man, if you remember, who had this beautiful statement to say.
And there is other evidence that does not support a criminal charge.
Maybe, just maybe, he was referring to the fentanyl in George Floyd's system, but no amount of fentanyl justifies you kneeling on someone's neck that long while they beg for their life. But of course, maybe Mike was drunk. Yes, he is an alcoholic. Just last year, he had to enter alcohol treatment. And I am far from someone who should judge people by their vices, but this man is in no position to be the prosecutor of a major city.
In this statement about his recent medical leave as Hennepin County attorney, Freeman says he's been evaluated for alcohol issues, agrees that he needs treatment, and will enter a program Monday determined to reclaim his health.
She was attempting to obtain all of that evidence and to come through with a meaningful determination.
And let's not forget, he would have been the prosecutor for the 2006 incident involving Derek Chauvin and the death of Wayne Reyes. Given the report, it does seem like it could have been a justifiable homicide. I mean, he's reported to be brandishing a shotgun at the cops, but given their history of racism, I'm not inclined to believe him. And given the fact that this too just went to a grand jury, the same grand jury that seems to then just say, yeah, no problem here, I'm gonna go ahead out on a limb and say Michael Freeman's reign was just like Amy Klobuchar, just another suit doing nothing. Also, to be fair, Michael Freeman has been taken off the George Floyd case, which is a good thing. Additionally, it's a lot more difficult to find the cases of police brutality while Michael Freeman was the prosecutor, more than likely because he never tried to run for president. The actions of both prosecutors deserve way more public scrutiny than Mrs. Buttersworth. This is ridiculous. People love using this term systemic racism, and it's not some food product, it's not some video game, it's not some TV show, It's not a fantasy race. What is systemic racism? You know what? It should be called systemic oppression. What it is, a bunch of do-nothing politicians, terrible legislation, bureaucratic bloat, corporate overreach, all things that oppress all Americans, but tend to have a larger weight in black, brown, and poor white communities. And now we have media and social media that's using black and brown as a shield to ostracize white people and tell them how privileged they are, regardless of what the situation is. By the way, it's pretty racist of you to think just because your skin is less melanated than mine that you're automatically privileged. That's not to say that there aren't struggles that I may or may not face being a black man, but I'm really tired of people speaking on my behalf and in many cases suggesting things that are way more harmful to the black community and people in general. They keep encouraging this concept of white privilege over and over and over again. And to be fair, I don't think most people realize that's what they're saying when they're saying it. I think a lot of people have just been brainwashed. You hear the phrase over and over and over again. You see it. It becomes a part of your daily lexicon. It's not intentional. I don't think people really give deep thought into what it means or what they're really saying or implying. It's to the point where you're considered a bad person if you don't think it exists. Maybe it's the aspiring hero in me, or maybe it's just knowing that you have to meet people halfway, but I genuinely believe a lot of this comes from good intentions or maybe even legitimate grievances that certain people may have had in their own lives. Don't get me wrong, a lot of this rhetoric is generated from a lot of bad actors, but I think a lot of people just need to see that they themselves are contributing to so much division in the name of anti-racism so they can have their Michael Douglas at the end of Falling Down moment.
I'm the bad guy?
Yeah.
How'd that happen? I did everything they told me to.
What are you really saying about yourself and your company when you had to write a pamphlet about how to get rid of white supremacy? Are you outing yourself as a white supremacist? Maybe still the blame is not going in the right direction. Yes, the Hennepin County Attorney's Office has a lot to answer for, but I would make an argument that all of this could have been avoided if we had a media that was more concerned with addressing these issues that we have.
We're dead. We're dead.
You're gonna be all right.
As Americans.
Help me! Tony, you still with us?
The Tony Temper incident is disturbing. It's just as hard to watch, just as unnerving, just as dehumanizing as George Floyd. And honestly, if our media did a better job at reporting this incident or the murder of Justine Damon, also by the Minneapolis Police Department, when she called 911, maybe George Floyd would still be alive. Maybe a lot of lives, businesses, and property would still be here because what's lost can never be returned. Historic buildings, several lives lost in riots and failed autonomous zones that, as of this recording, are still going on.
It's just a 19-year-old. No, that's Orange Lorenzo Anderson. That's my son.
And our media literally gaslit us. They pick and choose what news incidents they want to report. They pick and choose the angles they want to report. And they ostracize and divide us, the regular people who have to live with this every single day. To me, this is the face of a group that, despite its well-meaning name that's coded in 1984 style doublespeak, is encouraging things that are quantifiably destructive to the black community. This is crazy. Before closing the video, I wanted to get into a lot of miscellaneous things that I didn't have time for directly in the video, some of which will be jumping off points for other videos. I hear a lot of talk about reparations. There's an irony in that. There's no guarantee that just because you're black that you're descended from slaves. I know that's been paper genocided from history, but there were tons of free blacks who existed in the Americas, some of which were never slaves, some of which were emancipated, but still there were free blacks. And also, not to be outdone, there were some slaves that were basically white. I mean, look at the story of Sally Hemings. She was infamously Thomas Jefferson's slave, and she was 3/4 white, and her children were 7/8 white, and they were all slaves. I think people forget about the pass for white phenomenon, which means there are a lot of people who are Caucasian ancestry who have a black ancestor who passed for white to get into white society. Not only that, a majority of white people didn't own slaves. About 1 out of every 4 in the South, which is not the entire country. And also remember, the beginning of the 1900s saw a huge amount of European immigration. Part of that immigration is actually part of my ancestry as well. There's an Irish man in my ancestry who married a black woman when he got here in the early 1900s. So yeah, he had to have some balls on him to do that. And again, as we know, there were Europeans who we would consider black, so who knows? I also want to briefly touch on the story of Renee Bach. This definitely will be its own video. But for those who don't know her story, she's a fraudulent missionary. She helped start a clinic in Africa and took it over from medical staff, even though she had no medical experience, and it led to the deaths of hundreds of children. She has not faced jail time, even though there is a civil trial. The reasoning she gave was that she had a message for God, but when you look at this story, it seems like it was completely ego-based. I'm bringing this story up because the savior complex seems to be what is separating people and destroying people. Jeremiah 10:23 will tell you that man cannot even direct his own steps, so there's no way in the world you can tell someone else what to think or what to do. I know I left out a lot because it was too much information for just one video. I didn't present all this information to be divisive, but to be informative. I wanted to provide context and nuance and put pressure on the people that deserve it. I think through information, we can help to prevent any potential race war or civil war or even a world war, because it seems like there are people invested in all of those things. And in order for information to be exchanged freely, we need people to be allowed to disagree on things. We are dangerously close to the blue check mark becoming a new white hood, and it's disturbing. I'm a brand new YouTuber, so please correct me and tell me how much I suck in the comments. If you liked the video, please like the video, and even if you didn't, thank you for watching and thank you for your time.